This session will be incredibly challenging.
It's that heart and spirit of our people that allows me to report today that the state of our state remains strong.
He just fails to understand the nature of the problem. This isn't something we're going to fix with more government involvement, more taxes, and more regulation.
President Trump's tariffs are causing higher inflation, more economic uncertainty, and greater price increases to Washington families.
The most important issue is trying to make Washington more affordable.
Lawmakers are back in Olympia for the start of the legislative session, and they're facing another massive budget deficit. In this week's episode of In Session, we break down what filling that gap could look like for Washington residents, including talk of a potential millionaire's tax. We'll also hear from Governor Bob Ferguson for his State of the State address and look at multiple bills being considered related to federal immigration enforcement in our state. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Christine Pay. Olympia Bureau Chief Drew Mickelson is at the Capitol with what you need to know at the start of the session. Drew.
Hi, Christine, and welcome back to everyone to another year of In Session. We're up in the Senate gallery this week. So this is an even year. So the lawmakers are here for what's considered a short session, 60 days. They don't usually need as much time in the even years because they're not dealing with two-year budgets. But this current budget has a deficit, a $2 billion hole in it. So that will dominate a lot of this session. But also there will be this talk of the millionaire's tax you just mentioned. And as you can imagine, not everyone here is on board with that.
There's only one.
Before looking forward, those at the Capitol had a chance to look back at the original Washington State Constitution.
Having been born and brought up in this state, that document holds a lot of weight to me.
Washington State University student lobbyist Bhargav Iyer used it as motivation.
Oh yeah, that's kicking harder than coffee in the morning, so I'm super happy to see that. It's got the adrenaline pumping.
There will be lots of battles in Olympia this year. From proposed cuts to higher education and health care coverage to food banks and electric vehicle subsidies. Democrats blame the new deficit on tariffs and federal budget cuts.
This session will be incredibly challenging as federal funding is cut off for health care, for food, for clean energy credits, as the state has to shoulder hundreds of millions of dollars to comply with red tape the Trump administration is now mandating.
But tariffs don't explain why life in this Washington is more expensive than it is in nearly any other state in the country.
House Republican leader Representative Drew Stokesbury fears Democrats will raise taxes just like they did last year. He says talk of a new tax aimed at those who only make more than $1 million a year will eventually turn into an income tax for all.
It might be a millionaire's tax today, but eventually it's going to be a tax on you and me. People need to think, how many times have politicians in Olympia raised my taxes versus how many times have they cut my taxes?
I'll be here the whole time, yes sir.
Bhargav Iyer says just like the old Constitution, he'll be lurking around Olympia this session, trying to keep legislators in line.
Make sure that we get what we need to survive this legislative session.
Governor Ferguson says he would only sign that millionaire's tax into law if there were some tax breaks broken into it or included into it. For example, he said maybe we should eliminate the sales tax on items like toiletries and diapers. This is something he knows would take a little while to put together, but he wants it passed this year. He doesn't think it would go into effect, though, until 2029. Christine?
Andrew, sounds like there would also be a legal challenge as well.
Probably. That's a good guess from my opinion, but the governor said that as well. That's the way most major pieces of legislation go in the state. They end up in the courts. The governor says he would love to see it be a constitutional amendment, which would give it a little more of a stronger case if it got to the courts, but that would require a supermajority here in the House and Senate, and that's not going to happen. He thinks it may ultimately be up to the voters, and he thinks the voters will back it as well.
So, Drew, Governor Ferguson had a chance to lay out his priorities for the session. Out of all of this so far, what stood out to you?
Well, he didn't get too specific, and the thing that really jumped out to me was sort of his theme and the reception it got from the Republicans. A year ago, during Governor Bob Ferguson's inaugural address, he was brand new here in that position, the Republicans were downright giddy. They liked his talk of reform over taxes, but they say he let them down last session by signing several new tax increases into effect, and they were disappointed again this year.
Governors are required to address House and Senate members every year. Governor Bob Ferguson's theme for 2026, history. He pointed to the recent historic floods, highlighting how communities, first responders, and the state rallied to help each other.
It's that heart and spirit of our people that allows me to report today that the state of our state remains strong.
He blames the state's current deficit partially on federal policies and budget cuts from the Trump administration. Ferguson is calling for historic investments in transportation, billions for road construction and maintenance, and new ferries. He wants to increase funding for new housing, too, and says that can all be done without new taxes this year. But looking forward, he's calling for a new tax because for too long, he says, the state has relied on the poorest residents to pay the highest taxes.
That's not fair, that's not right, and that's why I'm calling for something truly historic, a millionaire's tax.
If there's anybody in this state that doesn't think that that's going to trickle on down to them and be a broad-based income tax.
Republicans are skeptical the tax would only impact millionaires. Leaders in the House and Senate say none of their members would support it, and they don't think the public wants it either.
This is a pretty big deal to just trot out after 100 years of saying it's unconstitutional, the people don't like it, 11 times and counting, and we're going to run it through over the top of the people in a short 60-day session. That just seems like a stretch to me.
Now, again, the governor does not envision that millionaire's tax impacting the current budget cycle. He thinks it's a long-term fix, and he used that address to sort of lay out how he envisions the tax working.
I want to be clear that when I use the term millionaire, I mean someone who makes more than $1 million in income in a single year. That does not include assets like the value of your home. Less than 0.5% of Washingtonians will pay it. Now let's talk about what happens to the revenue from this millionaire's tax. Bottom line, we must take a significant percentage of these dollars and put them back in the pockets of Washingtonians. Let me give you two examples. Some of those gains must be used to expand eligibility for and increase the amount of the Working Families Tax Credit. Under this program, the state sends a check each year to working families. That's a great start, thanks to you. But we can do even better. We must expand this program so that more people are eligible and increase it so Washingtonians get more money back in their pockets. Second, we must also use a significant portion of the revenue to lower taxes on small business owners. Small businesses are the backbone of our economy. They create jobs and they build community. I want to let them keep more of their hard-earned money. They should not have to pay a B&O tax until they gross more than $1 million in revenue. For example, if you own a business and you gross $800,000 annually, you have a ton of expenses and currently pay about $4,000 in B&O tax. That small business owner should pay nothing. This approach creates the biggest tax break for small business owners in state history. We should also use the gains from the millionaire's tax to put more money back into K-12 schools and bolster Washington students' access to a world-class education.
Unlike last year, the Republicans did not give Governor Ferguson any standing ovations. At one point, a couple of their members stood up and walked out when the governor started criticizing the federal government, specifically recent immigration enforcement operations.
So I'm confident we are well positioned to address internal challenges and meet the moment with unity and clarity. But we cannot ignore the external challenges that create division and cost to our state, our families, and our communities. We need to be direct about what is happening in our country and our state with ICE. It's horrific, it's unjust, and it needs to stop now. Pastor, I'm ad-libbing a bit, but I think in your remarks you mentioned anger at injustice as part of your remarks. I'm angry about this, and I think many of you are as well. As an American, I never thought I would see federal agents in masks jumping out of unmarked cars and grabbing people off our streets. This conduct will undoubtedly be remembered as a shameful period in our nation's history.
Now, the governor did use his address to specifically identify a couple of bills that he would be backing and said he would sign, specifically one that would eliminate or prohibit the use of masks, face coverings, for any law enforcement agents, especially those involved in immigration operations. Christine, I know you have more on that.
Yes, Drew, thank you very much. We'll check back in just a moment.
Before you is Senate Bill 5855 concerning face coverings by law enforcement officers.
I believe it'll make our marginalized and immigrant communities feel safer.
That control is retained by the United States. That's been longstanding principle since the 1800s.
So immigration is top of mind for many Washington lawmakers as we kick off this legislative session. In addition to the ban on masks, during the first week, several bills were introduced in the House and Senate related to federal immigration enforcement in our state, as Drew has been mentioning. King 5's immigration reporter Sharon Yu breaks down what you need to know.
Several bills related to federal immigration enforcement are on the docket this session. This follows the heels of a University of Washington report that showed that federal agents are still having access to Washington state driver's data from the Department of Licensing.
This is a little bit like whack-a-mole.
Representative Chris Stearns says the Members of Color Caucus is especially concerned to hear feds continue to have their hands on DOL data.
The federal government, and particularly this administration, they're going to try to, if one door is blocked, they're going to try to go around and find another one.
The Department of Licensing and the Washington State Patrol, who runs the system the feds are using to get access, say they're not violating the state law that bars agencies from helping immigration enforcement. Stearns says that's not enough.
Fear is kind of spreading across our country, and it is definitely spreading here to Washington. So, you know, my sense is we have a duty to act.
Several anti-federal immigration enforcement bills are on the docket for this legislative session. Among them, 2 companion bills banning all law enforcement from wearing face coverings when interacting with the public.
Masks are being used to obscure identities, to escalate tensions, to stoke fears, to deny public transparency, and to shield government from accountability. That can't happen here.
Another bill targets Flock, the automatic license plate reader system that's active in at least 17 jurisdictions in Washington state.
Representative Salahuddin, I was just talking with him earlier, you know, incredible leader on this issue. But yeah, he has a bill to, you know, safeguard the use of Flock, you know, license plate reader data. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we're working on. You know, it feels like the work doesn't end.
In Olympia, Sharon Yu, King 5 News.
The only thing that has given me any comfort is that my grandmother's death would be the reason that Haynes spent the rest of his life in prison. If this bill passes, that will not happen.
Still ahead, a proposed change to Washington's 3 strikes law has a family fighting back. How it could get some offenders released from prison. And lawmakers in Olympia are once again debating whether to lower Washington's legal blood alcohol limit for drivers. Up next, the emotional plea from a grieving sister and why the hospitality industry is pushing back. Welcome back. The governor says the current budget deficit can be filled without raising any new taxes. Leaders in the House and Senate aren't so sure, though. Taxes and tapping into the state's emergency savings may be part of the solution. Olympia Bureau Chief Drew Mickelson joins us again with more on what options legislators are looking at, Drew.
Christine, we haven't seen the formal proposals yet from either the House or the Senate. We got a little preview, though. It doesn't sound like there will be any bold new taxes proposed. That seems to be something that won't be considered. But the Senate Majority Leader, Jamie Peterson, said they may look at raising some taxes. He brought up maybe raising the cigarette tax. Another idea is this emergency savings account. It's called the Rainy Day Fund around here. The governor wants to take $1 billion from that, and the Republicans don't like that idea at all, but the Democrats we spoke with said it is being explored.
I think it's too early to say what we're going to do with the budget stabilization account this year. I would say it feels like it's for times like this So, I would be supportive of looking at that as a way to, avoid really significant impacts to Washingtonians in K-12 education or higher education or childcare or healthcare. So it's certainly, on the table.
And the constitutional amendment by which the voters approved the budget stabilization account specifically outlines what it means to be reigning and says that that's when employment growth is less than 1%. That's the situation that we're in right now because of the economic conditions that the Trump administration has wrought. So it is an appropriate time for us to be considering that as part of the short-term budget solution.
The governor mentioned briefly that the state has a AAA bond rating. That is in part because of our rainy day fund and the procedures we have around that. The more we chip away at the rainy day fund and start using it to backfill budget holes, the smaller our ending fund balance is, the more we risk losing that. We also enjoy that in part because of our lack of an income tax, and I think imposing an income tax would threaten our AAA bond rating. We have much more stable finances as a state without an income tax. So he wanted to take a little bit of credit for that, but a couple of his proposals would actually imperil that continued rating.
We spoke with State Treasurer Mike Pelliciotti about this, and he said he has concerns. He thinks it might be risky to tap into the rainy day fund. Christine.
So, Drew, when was the last time the state dipped into that savings account?
We looked that up, 2021. You may remember the pandemic. That was a time when the state needed to tap into that for social and health programs. Also in 2015, when there were some wildfire fighting bills that were outstanding. And a lot of folks here say that's what it should be used for, emergencies, not to balance the budget. But we'll see.
Okay, Drew, thank you very much. Some county sheriffs are pushing back against a proposed bill to raise standards for police leaders across the state. The bill was introduced today in the Senate Law and Justice Committee. It would add new statewide requirements for sheriffs, including being at least 25 years of age, having at least 5 years of law enforcement experience, and they must pass a background check. Supporters say it sets consistent standards for law enforcement leaders.
Great leaders lead by example. They embody the standards of accountability that they expect from their subordinates. Today, Madam Chair, on Dr. King's 97th birthday, this legislation continues his work of building trust between law enforcement and communities they are sworn to protect and to serve.
Law enforcement leaders can have a significant impact in immigrant communities, which makes it so important to have trust and confidence in those who lead these agencies.
The bill would also require certification and more oversight by the Criminal Justice Training Commission. Some sheriffs argue it would make it easier for the commission to decertify them, even though they're elected by voters.
I don't recognize your authority to impose these controls over me, and when you try to remove me from office, thousands of Pierce County residents will surround the county city building in downtown Tacoma and will not allow that to happen. I hope it doesn't come to that, but I and they are prepared.
The Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs opposes the bill, but called those comments by Sheriff Swank inflammatory and potentially threatening. The association is considering expelling Swank. Last year, a similar bill was introduced in the House, but never made it out of committee. For the fourth year in a row, lawmakers in Olympia are debating whether to lower the state's legal blood alcohol limit for drivers. A bill introduced in the House Community Safety Committee would drop the threshold from 0.08 to 0.05. During the meeting, the sister of a man killed by an impaired driver in 2024 told lawmakers her brother's death was completely preventable.
A woman who had DUIs spanning 40 years never took her foot off the gas and impacted his car, his Corvette, at 75 miles an hour. Holding on to grief and anger isn't productive, but solutions are. And that's why I'm asking you today to please pass this bill.
Several organizations, including the Washington Hospitality Association, the Washington Wine Commission, and Washington Brewers Guild, spoke against the bill, arguing it would put an unfair burden on businesses and their staff.
This bill imposes new restrictions on responsible consumers and added liability on small businesses like breweries by expecting staff to identify when a customer has reached a 0.05 BAC when there is no training or practical means to do so.
If passed, the law would take effect on July 1st of this year. Lawmakers in Olympia heard testimony on a bill that would change how Washington sentences repeat offenders. The proposal drew emotional comments, including from a granddaughter who says her grandmother was killed by a man with a long criminal history. King 5's Bridget Chavez was at the hearing and has the details.
First of all, I want you guys to think if you've ever known anybody who's been impacted by a violent act.
The room went quiet as Melanie Roberts shared how a proposed bill would impact victims of crime and their families.
Would it make it okay if the drunk driver, rapist, robber, or murderer was under 18? Would the victim be any less violated, traumatized, or dead? No. So if the outcome is the same for the victim, why is it different for the perpetrators?
Right now, Washington's 3 strikes law can send someone to prison for life after 3 serious felonies, even if one of those happened when they were a teen. Senate Bill 5945 would change that and could let about 24 inmates ask a judge to revisit their life sentences.
And I think this is just a common sense bill for equity and fairness in our system.
Supporters argue the change would fix what they call an outdated part of the law.
This bill will stop judges from being forced to sentence people to mandatory sentences of life in prison without the possibility of parole due to an offense committed while the person was under the age of 18.
Roberts shared the tragedy of losing her grandmother.
My grandma doesn't have a voice anymore. I'm her voice.
The 80-year-old dog walker was carjacked and killed in Seattle in 2024. The man accused has a lengthy criminal history.
The only thing that has given me any comfort is that my grandmother's death would be the reason that Haynes spent the rest of his life in prison. If this bill passes, that will not happen.
That was Bridget Chavez reporting. So that was a public hearing only. No vote was taken. Lawmakers will decide later whether this proposal moves forward. Well, coming up next, we go back to Drew Mickelson in Olympia for a look at what's to come during week 2 of the session, including a push to name a state shark. Well, it's been a busy start to this legislative session, and it's not expected to slow down. Olympia Bureau Chief Drew Mickelson joins us again with a look at what's to come ahead. Drew.
Yeah, Christine, despite it being one of those short sessions, legislators have long to-do lists on top of all of that budget and tax talk. One of the more controversial bills is one we spoke about earlier, this one that would put some limits on those flock cameras. And these are cameras that you may have in your hometown. They're across the state, and they help police identify license plates, and that can help investigations like stolen vehicles or even murders. The flock cameras have come under scrutiny, though, after a study last year found that multiple agencies were using and sharing flock data with federal partners, including immigration officials. So there's a bill to prohibit the sharing out of state, and it would only let agencies hold on to images for 72 hours. There will be some passionate debate on that one. It has its first hearing in the second week of the session. Christine?
And we'll certainly follow that. Drew, before we go, we understand there will be at least one fun bill debated in Olympia this session. What can you tell us?
Yeah, lots of heavy topics to be dealt with for sure. You may remember a couple years ago we talked about the state dinosaur. Well, this year there's a push for an official state shark. I got to check my notes here to make sure I get the name right, but it's the blunt-nose six-gill shark. You may not have heard of it before, but it could soon be the official shark of the state of Washington. It's a species closely associated with Washington's coastal and Puget Sound waters. They are unique as well, as the name suggests. They have 6 gills. All the other sharks just have 5. That bill has not been scheduled for a hearing yet, but like a good old shark, it's lurking around here somewhere. Christine, back to you.
Drew, we know you'll be watching. Okay, thanks very much. Drew Mickelson reporting in Olympia. Thank you. Okay, well, we will have much more on all of these topics next week on In Session. And to see all of our coverage so far, you can text the word session to 206-448-4545, and we'll send you a link. Thank you so much for joining us. Until next time.